This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated online cinema streaming exceptional films from around the globe. Get 1 month free at mubi.com/thediscardedimage. The 1980s were a decade where electronic synth music really hit its stride, but this technology was still in its infancy and was therefore primal in its implementation. So to many looking back, it often feels dated. In many instances, I tend to agree, but I feel there are films where the score perfectly synergized with the film's aesthetic. But first, I want to look at where it all started. Synthesizers were used by numerous pop bands in the 60s, and by the early 70s they were used extensively by rock behemoths like Pink Floyd. But a turning point for many was the soundtrack to Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. Kubrick always strived to be ahead of the curve, and was looking for music that would represent a dystopian future. The composer Wendy Carlos created these dark, brooding soundscapes that would match a world that was both colourfully brash and despairingly drab. The film, set in England, resonated with many rising Brit synth pop bands, who saw their own environments reflected in the film. The future was now, as old Victorian buildings were being torn down and replaced with concrete high-rises. The German band Kraftwerk were also major 70s pioneers. A new generation of German musicians wanted to move away from the traditional culture that had bore the Nazi Party and pioneered electronic pop music, alongside a highly innovative and influential psych rock movement, krautrock. Kraftwerk were dubbed Robopop, as their music sounded heavily mechanized, and thematically they covered similar ground, with album titles like Computer World and Man Machine. So it seems only fateful that a few years later an electronic score would feature heavily in a film like 1982's Blade Runner, a science fiction noir about androids. On the other side of the synth spectrum, and arguably as influential to the progress of electronic music, was Giorgio Moroder. His collaboration with Donna Summer, I Feel Love, was a revolutionary disco track, and is seen to have birthed electronic dance music. Moroder was soon snapped up by Hollywood, composing the soundtrack for Midnight Express. Despite winning him an Academy Award, the music feels like a strange fit for a gritty prison drama. This wasn't the case in his next film, American Gigolo. Moroder's vibrant Europop style blends perfectly with the film's visual aesthetic. It's not film noir or neo-noir, but neon noir. It presents a vision of LA that will become a future staple. 2011's Drive is the most obvious example, a film with both a similar look and a retro synth-pop soundtrack. Gigolo was writer-director Paul Schrader's first collaboration with Italian production designer Ferdinando Scarfiotti, who had recently worked with Bernardo Bertolucci on The Conformist, one of the most stunningly designed films of all time. And with Moroder being a fellow Italian, it felt like a match made in heaven. Moroder's score also fits with the characterization of the lead protagonist, Julian. Synth scores are often criticized for being synthetic, i.e. fake, plastic, and inhuman. Julian is a narcissistic, materialistic male gigolo who sees relationships with women as merely a paycheck, so the artificiality of the film's score reflects the character's inner life. This theme is echoed in Drive, a film whose lead character is emotionally stunted. He's listed in the credits simply as driver, and seems almost more vehicle than man. This relates back to Kraftwerk, who often made records about mechanized transport. It also brings to mind the track Love on a Train from Risky Business, composed by another German band from the same era as Kraftwerk, Tangerine Dream, who would produce a number of film soundtracks in the late 70s and 80s. The driver's humanity is buried deep inside. It takes a woman to bring it out of him. In Blade Runner, this crisis of humanity is more severe, as characters are not only living in a supremely artificial environment, but are questioning their own anatomy. Or how about Michael Mann's debut film Thief, which also features a Tangerine Dream score. The film follows a safecracker who learned in prison to be emotionally remote. A man pays strict attention to the labour that defines his character's identity. However, he can't help but yearn for more. Yet the criminal world he inhabits is a cold one. Mann's 80s Chicago is Blade Runner-esque with its rain-soaked streets, and the lights and electricity that illuminate the environment are a core part of the aesthetic. Later in the 80s, Mann would direct the Hannibal Lecter film Manhunter. Despite the film's many qualities, the use of synthpop often jars with the disturbing horror of the story. The same can be said for much of the visual design too. It has traces of Mann's chic TV cop show, Miami Vice, a pure product of the 80s that hasn't aged well. Another Miami-based crime drama is arguably Giorgio Moroder's crowning film achievement, Brian De Palma's epic gangster opus, Scarface. De Palma was a fan of what he saw and heard in American Gigolo, and hired both Moroder and Scarfiotti to create the look and sound of the film. It allowed the director to modernise the gangster film, compared to its more classical representations in the past. Scarface's style was bold and operatic, pushing these criminals' drive for commerce to its most vulgar extremes. And it pushes towards the future, the way that Kubrick had envisioned a future dystopia in A Clockwork Orange. De Palma was seeing it with the drug war. And like Alex the Large, and many of the other characters I've referenced, Tony Montana lacks sufficient humanity. The brash, bombastic score is mixed with many synth pop tracks Moroder also produced, which allowed De Palma to indulge his satirical side. He noticed that discos were getting filled up with this type of music, and everyone in them was high on coke, swept up in these shallow dance records. A track like Push It to the Limit sees the director with his tongue firmly planted in his cheek, as De Palma critiques the allure of excess in the capitalist system. It was in 80s America that Gordon Gekko coined the phrase, greed is good, or in Scarface, it's the world is yours. It's a culture that implores you to ruthlessly strive for immense wealth and status. But when Tony gets there, he finds it's as hollow as the music backing it. It therefore comes with great irony that Moroder would later win his third Oscar for the track Take My Breath Away in Top Gun, a film that embraces many of the decade's negative attributes, with its amped up, testosterone-fueled jingoism. And finally, there's Flashdance. It was only a matter of time before a disco hitmaker got involved in this type of film. Although it sounds similar to many of the tracks in Scarface, at least the song is genuinely aspirational in intent. And yet again, it's an Academy Award-winning piece of music too. Another pioneer of electronic music that I didn't mention is the subject of Mubi's latest release, Ruizhi Sakamoto, Coda. Sakamoto is a legendary musician whose synth pop band Yellow Magic Orchestra came right on the heels of Kraftwerk, and he's produced many film soundtracks, including the iconic synth score that featured in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. He's worked with a couple of the filmmakers I mentioned in the video too, Bernardo Bertolucci and Brian De Palma. The documentary is an intimate portrait of both the artist and the man. Fresh from its theatrical release, it's now available to stream exclusively on Mubi in the US and Canada. There's only over 30 films to choose from on Mubi's platform. Every day there's a new film, and then every day they take one away. It's all expertly curated. You can head over to Mubi.com/The Discarded Image for your 30-day extended free trial. Thanks everyone for watching. Like the Fincher video I did a while back, this was just an excuse really to use content from musicians I love. And I'm always trying to get friends to listen to German music, so if you haven't already, then I check out bands like Kraftwerk or Can or Tangerine Dream, and others from the era like Nue or Faust. And while you're at it, why not check out some more Giorgio Moroder? His solo album From Here to Eternity I was listening to a lot while making the video. And as always, thanks to my patrons. If you want to support the channel, then that's the way to do it, and I'll see you next time.